I got the midnight to 5 shift at KUTX because my band fell apart in July, and I'd been skating on rent for 2 months straight. That was pretty much it. The program director called me on a Wednesday and said they needed someone who could handle basic board ops and wouldn't mind the graveyard slot. I told her I'd done audio engineering for local shows, which was technically true if you counted running a Behringer mixer at Mohawk for drink tickets. She said fine, be there Saturday at 11:45. The money wasn't great, but it was regular, and my landlord had started leaving notes under my door with increasingly creative spelling of the word eviction. So yeah, I took it. I showed up that first night with about 15 minutes to spare, which felt responsible until I realized I had no idea where to park. The station sat in this squat brick building just off South Congress, wedged between a taco truck that only opened for breakfast and a vintage clothing store that looked like it hadn't been vintage in 1992. There was a small lot out back, with maybe 6 spaces, all unmarked. I picked the one farthest from the dumpster and hoped nobody would yell at me about it later. The front door was locked. Obviously, I stood there for a solid 30 seconds before I remembered the program director, Judy, her email signature said, had told me to use the side entrance after hours. I walked around the building, found a dented metal door with a card reader, and pulled out the access badge they'd mailed me in a padded envelope that also contained a 2-page equipment liability waiver and a Whataburger coupon. The card reader blinked green. The door buzzed. Inside it smelled like old carpet and coffee somebody had burned maybe 6 hours ago. The hallway was narrow, painted this industrial beige that probably had a name like Sunset Taupe, but really just looked tired. Overhead fluorescence flickered in that way that makes you think about migraines. I could hear music playing somewhere deeper in the building, something folky, a lot of acoustic guitar, but I couldn't tell if it was live on air or just someone's Spotify. I followed the signs to the production wing, past a break room with a microwave that had a handwritten note taped to it that said, "Broken, do not use, yes, this means you," past a door labeled server room that hummed loud enough to hear through the walls, past what looked like an old storage closet full of cardboard boxes and tangled XLR cables. The studio was at the end of the hall. Door was half open. I could see the glow of the console through the window, all those little LED meters bouncing in green and amber. I pushed inside. The room was smaller than I expected, maybe 12 feet by 15, with this low drop ceiling that made the whole space feel compressed. The walls were covered in acoustic foam, the cheap pyramid kind you can get off Amazon, and someone had stuck a KUTX bumper sticker on the back of the door at a crooked angle. The main console sat against the far wall, a Wheatstone LX24, which I only knew because the logo was right there on the surface. It had maybe 24 faders, a bunch of rotary knobs I didn't recognize, and a small monitor screen showing a countdown timer. 19 minutes until the next break. To the left of the console was a rack of outboard gear, a compressor, an EQ, something that might have been a limiter or a gate. I wasn't sure. To the right was a desk with a computer running what looked like automation software. Big waveforms scrolling across the screen, track titles in a queue. There was a log sheet clipped to a board, rows and columns half-filled in blue pen. I sat down in the chair. It was one of those ergonomic mesh ones that somebody had adjusted for a person much taller than me, so my feet didn't quite reach the floor. I pulled the log sheet closer and tried to make sense of it. Columns for time, track title, artist, duration, transmitter power. The last entry was from 11:30. Someone had written, "See you in hell," in the notes column and underlined it twice. Real professional. I was still staring at the log when I heard footsteps in the hall. Quick, deliberate. The door swung open and Judy Taylor walked in carrying a laminated card and a roll of packing tape. She looked exactly like her email photo, which was weirdly reassuring. Black blazer over a QTX shirt, dark hair pulled back tight, the kind of posture that made you sit up straighter without meaning to. She glanced at me, then at the console, then back at me. You're Jeff. Yeah, you made it on time. I did. She crossed to the console and set the laminated card down next to the center fader. It was maybe 5 inches by 7, printed in bold black text on a white background. She tore off a strip of packing tape with her teeth and pressed the card flat against the metal surface, smoothing out the bubbles with her thumb. "These are the rules," she said. "You follow them exactly. Not mostly. Not when you remember." "Exactly." I leaned forward to read the card. It was a list, numbered 1 through 8. I read it twice. Judy was watching me. "Okay," I said. "That's it? Okay? I mean, yeah. Don't go in the basement. Don't mess with the limiter. Got it." She didn't smile. "The rules aren't suggestions. If you break them, your shift will get worse. A lot worse." "Worse how?" "Just don't break them." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small key ring with 2 keys on it. One looked like a standard door key. The other was smaller, copper-colored with a round head. "This one's for the front entrance," she said, holding up the standard key. "This one's for the transmitter log cabinet. You'll need it at 0200 and 0400 to record the readings. The cabinet's in the hall, just past the break room. You'll see it." I took the key ring. "Anything else?" "The automation handles most of the playlist. You just need to make sure it doesn't crash and that the log gets filled out on time. If something goes wrong, call me. My number's on the card." I looked at the card again. There was a phone number printed at the bottom in smaller text. "And if you get bored," Judy added, "don't start exploring. Don't poke around. Do your job and go home." "Sure." She looked at me for another few seconds, and I got the feeling she was deciding whether to say something else. Whatever it was, she didn't. She just nodded once and walked out, her footsteps fading back down the hall. I heard the side door buzz. Then, nothing. I sat there in the mesh chair and listened to the building settle around me. The console hummed. The automation software scrolled another track into the queue. Some indie thing I didn't recognize. The countdown timer on the monitor ticked down to 16 minutes. I looked at the rules card again. Judy had taped it down hard enough that the edges were already starting to curl. "Do not enter the basement level for any reason." That one stuck with me. The station was quiet in a way that felt too big for the size of the building. I could still hear the music playing. On air now, I figured, since the meters were moving in time with it. But everything else was just dead air. No voices in the hall, no footsteps, no hum of traffic from South Congress, even though the street was maybe 50 feet away. I reached for the log sheet and filled in the midnight entry. Track title, artist, duration. My handwriting looked shaky next to the previous operator's neat print. I checked the transmitter readings. The console had a small digital readout showing forward power, reflected power, and modulation percentage. I wrote down the numbers even though I wasn't totally sure what they meant. Forward power, 3,000 watts. Reflected power, 15 watts. Modulation, 82%. It all looked fine. Probably. The next break wasn't for another 14 minutes. I swiveled the chair and looked around the studio again, trying to get my bearings. There was a shelf above the desk with a couple of old radio manuals, a box of blank CDs, and a coffee mug that said, "I'm mostly here for the free coffee," which seemed optimistic given the state of the break room. On the floor next to the rack of outboard gear was a cardboard box half full of old cassette tapes. I leaned over and flipped through a few of them. Most were labeled with dates and show names. Morning Drive, March 12, 2018, and Live from Stubbs, August 9, 2019. A couple weren't labeled at all, just blank white stickers. "Do not play any unmarked reels or cassettes." I pushed the box back with my foot and turned to face the console again. The building was still too quiet. I thought about the basement level. Judy had mentioned it specifically, which meant it existed, and the way she'd said it, for any reason, made it sound like people had gone down there before and regretted it. Or maybe I was just reading into things because it was midnight and I was alone in a building I didn't know. I got up and opened the studio door. The hallway stretched out in both directions, fluorescents buzzing overhead. To the right was the way I'd come in, the break room, the server room, the side entrance. To the left, the hall curved slightly and I could see another door maybe 20 feet down. It was painted the same industrial beige as the walls, but it had a small placard next to it that I couldn't read from where I stood. I walked toward it. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. The placard said, "Stairs, basement storage." The door had a handle, but no window. I stood there looking at it for a while. I didn't hear anything on the other side. No footsteps, no mechanical hum, nothing. Just the door and the idea of stairs going down. I reached for the handle, stopped. Do not enter the basement level for any reason. I pulled my hand back and walked to the studio. 12 minutes until the next break. I sat down and tried to look like I knew what I was doing. The meters bounced. The automation queued up another track. Everything was fine. Except the basement thing was nagging at me now. Not because I wanted to go down there, I didn't particularly, but because Judy had made such a point of it. Like it was the most important rule on the card. Don't go in the basement. Don't even think about it. Which made me think about it. I wondered what was down there. Storage, the placard said, but storage of what? Old equipment? Archived recordings? Bodies? That last one was a joke. Probably. The building felt too empty. That was the real problem. I kept waiting to hear something, a car passing outside, a door closing somewhere, the AC kicking on, but it was just the music and the hum of the console and my own breathing. I checked my phone. 12:07. 4 hours and 53 minutes left in the shift. I looked at the rules card again. Do not leave the building during your shift. If you hear knocking, do not respond. If the lights go out, stay in the studio. The phrasing bothered me. Not if the power goes out, but if the lights go out. Like it was a specific thing that happens sometimes. A thing Judy expected. I filled out another log entry, checked the transmitter readings again, even though I'd just done it 10 minutes ago. The numbers were the same. 3,000 watts forward, 15 reflected, 81% modulation. I wrote them down anyway. The next break hit at 12:15. I watched the automation handle it. Station ID, 2 PSAs, a local underwriting spot for a bookstore on North Loop, then back to music. I didn't have to touch anything. The board did it all. I got up and walked to the transmitter log cabinet. It was right where Judy said it would be, just past the break room, mounted on the wall at chest height. I used the copper key to unlock it. Inside was a 3-ring binder with rows of hand-filled tables. I found today's page and copied over the readings I'd written on the studio log. My handwriting still looked shaky. I locked the cabinet and went back to the studio. The building was still too quiet. I sat down and pulled out my phone, thinking I'd burn some time on Twitter or Reddit, but I didn't have signal. Just one bar, flickering in and out. The Wi-Fi password was taped to the underside of the desk, LBJR Radio 1967, and I connected to that instead. Opened Twitter. Scrolled for maybe 5 minutes before I realized I wasn't actually reading anything, just looking at words. I put the phone down. The studio felt smaller now. The acoustic foam on the walls seemed closer than it had been when I first walked in. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty every time. Do not let anyone in after midnight. I wondered if that had ever been a problem. If someone had shown up at the side door at 2 a.m, and the board operator had just buzzed them in without thinking. And then what? What happened that made Judy add it to the list? I didn't want to know, except I kind of did. The countdown timer ticked down to the next break. I watched the automation handle it again. Station ID, weather sponsor, 3 PSAs, then a block of music, 4 tracks, no interruptions, I filled out the log, checked the transmitter readings, wrote them down. It was 12:43. I got up and walked to the door again, looked down the hall toward the basement stairwell. The placard was just visible from where I stood, that little rectangle of text next to the beige door. I went back to the console and sat down. The rules card was right there, taped down flat, edges curling. I read it again. All 8 rules. Do not enter the basement level for any reason. Do not play any unmarked reels or cassettes. Do not let anyone in after midnight. Judy's voice in my head. If you break them, your shift will get worse. I figured the best thing to do was just stick to the routine. Fill out the log on time. Check the transmitter readings at 2 and 4. Don't wander. Don't explore. Do the job and go home. That was the plan. The music kept playing. The meters kept bouncing. The building stayed quiet in that too big way that made every small sound feel like it mattered. I checked my phone. 12:51. 4 hours and 9 minutes to go. I kept my eyes on the console and tried not to think about the basement or the unmarked tapes or what kind of knocking Judy thought I might hear. I just watched the countdown timer and waited for the next break. The rules card sat there under the packing tape, bold text on white laminate. I told myself I'd follow them exactly. I told myself the shift would be fine. At 1:07, I was half reading the playlist on the automation screen when I noticed one of the VU meters bouncing. Channel 6. The needle swung up into the yellow, dropped back, jumped again. I stared at it. Channel 6 wasn't supposed to be live. That input was labeled Studio B on the strip of masking tape below the fader, and the fader was all the way down. Studio B probably didn't even exist anymore. The whole row of channels past 12 looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Dust on the knobs, tape labels faded to brown. But the meter kept moving. I leaned closer. The needle was responding to something. Audio coming in. Not loud, but steady. I reached for the headphone jack on the console, plugged in the old Sennheisers hanging from a hook on the rack, and pushed the channel 6 cue button. Singing. A man's voice. Clean tenor, no reverb, no processing. Just a voice, close and clear, singing something I didn't recognize. Sounded old, like 40s or 50s old maybe. The kind of thing you'd hear in a diner that only plays music your grandparents slow dance to. I pulled the headphones off, and the singing was still there. Faint, but audible. Coming through the monitor speakers mounted above the console. That didn't make sense. The monitors were supposed to play only what I routed to them, and I hadn't routed anything. The channel 6 fader was still down. I checked the monitor section. The source selector was set to program, which meant it should only play the main output, the stuff actually going to air, not some random dead input. The singing kept going, smooth and easy, no strain. The guy sounded comfortable. He hit a long note, held it, let it taper off into silence. Then he spoke. "Can anybody hear me?" His voice was polite, a little uncertain, not like he was joking around. I sat there staring at the console. My hands were on the edge of the desk. "Hello?" he said. "Is anybody there?" The channel 6 meter jumped with every word. Okay, I figured it out. Had to be a prank. Judy didn't seem like the type, but maybe the engineer, whoever that was, had rigged something up to mess with the new guy. Some kind of loop. Pre-recorded audio patched into a dead channel to make me think the place was haunted or whatever. That was it. Had to be. I reached for the talkback mic, the little gooseneck thing mounted next to the main faders. I pressed the button on the bass and leaned in. "Hey," I said. My voice came out flat through the studio monitors, that weird delayed feeling of hearing yourself a half-second late. "Yeah, I can hear you. The line's live. The bit's over." I let go of the button. Silence. The channel 6 meter dropped to 0. No bounce, no movement. I waited, watched the needle, counted to 10 in my head. Nothing. I exhaled and sat back. There it was, Prank confirmed. I'd called it out and whoever was running the gag had bailed. Probably someone in the building with a mic patched into the system, maybe even watching on a security camera somewhere, laughing at me for taking the bait. I pulled the headphones off the hook again and cued channel 6 one more time just to be sure. Dead air. Just the faint hiss of an open preamp. I nodded to myself. Yeah, over. Then I heard my own voice. It came through the monitors, not the talkback, not a delay or a loop of what I just said. My voice. But wrong. Jeff. I froze. I need you to come downstairs. The tone was off, strained, higher than I actually sound, or maybe just stretched thin, the way your voice gets when you're trying not to yell. But it was my cadence, my phrasing, the little pause before downstairs, where I always hesitate on two-syllable words. The channel 6 meter wasn't moving. I yanked the headphones out of the jack and spun around in the chair, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway. Nobody. The hallway was empty. The door was still half open the way Judy had left it. I turned back to the console. The automation was still running. The timer showed 3 minutes until the next break. Everything was normal. Everything except the fact that I'd just heard my own voice tell me to go to the basement. I checked the patch bay. That's the first thing you do when audio shows up where it shouldn't. The patch bay is this big grid of 1/4-inch jacks on the rack to the left of the console, rows and rows of inputs and outputs. If someone wanted to route a signal somewhere weird, they'd use a patch cable. Plug it in, send audio from point A to point B. Simple. I scanned the rows. Most of the jacks were empty. A few had permanent patches, short cables with red and yellow bands connecting things that were supposed to stay connected. I didn't see anything that looked out of place. No random cable running from an output into channel 6. No extra connections I didn't recognize. I traced the signal path in my head. Studio B input would come from somewhere. A physical mic or a line from another room. It'd hit the preamp, go through the channel strip, and if the fader was up, it'd feed the program bus. But the fader was down. And even if it wasn't, that wouldn't explain why the audio bypassed the fader entirely and went straight to the monitors. I crouched down and looked at the back of the console. Cable spaghetti, XLRs and TRS plugs, and some kind of DB25 snake I didn't want to touch. I followed the monitor feed as far as I could. Everything looked correct. No weird Y cables. No splits I couldn't account for. I stood up. My knees cracked. The rules card was still taped next to the center fader. Rule number 1, do not enter the basement level for any reason. I stared at it. Then I picked up my phone and pulled up Judy's number from the bottom of the card. I didn't want to call her at 1 in the morning on my first shift, but this felt like the kind of technical issue she'd want to know about. Phantom audio. Voices on dead channels. That was her territory. I hit call. The phone rang once in my ear, twice. Then it clicked over and I heard her voicemail greeting start. You've reached Judy Taylor at KUTX. I'm either on another call or away from my desk. Her voice cut off mid-word, and the singer came back. Same guy, same smooth tenor. No music this time, just his voice, close and clear, like he was standing right next to me. Can anybody hear me? I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. The call timer was still running. 17 seconds. 18. I brought it back up. Hello? The voice said, calm, patient. Is somebody there? I hung up. My hand was shaking a little. Not much, just enough that I had to set the phone down on the desk so I wouldn't drop it. I looked at the console. Channel 6 was still dead. No meter movement, no audio. I looked at the rules card. Do not enter the basement level for any reason. Okay. So this was, what? A loop. Had to be. Some kind of automation glitch. Maybe the station had old recordings stored in the system and something got triggered by accident. A file got queued wrong. A script misfired. That happens. Stations run on ancient software half the time. Stuff breaks in weird ways. And the voice on Judy's voicemail, that was probably the same thing. A crossed line, a corrupted greeting file, or maybe I'd misheard it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, and my brain filled in something that wasn't there. That made sense. I nodded to myself. Yeah, that was logical. I sat back down in the chair and watched the automation handle the 0115 break. Station ID, PSA for some nonprofit I didn't catch, another PSA, then back to music. A piano thing, instrumental. I didn't recognize it. I filled out the log. Time, track, artist. My handwriting looked worse than before. The letters were cramped and uneven. I checked my phone. 1:23 a.m. 3 hours and 37 minutes left in the shift. I kept my eyes on the console. Watched the meters. Watched the faders. Watched the VU needles bounce with the program audio and nothing else. The building was quiet. At 1:55, the red light above the basement stairs turned on. I wasn't in the hallway. I was still in the studio. But I could see it through the open door. A faint red glow spilling into the beige corridor about 20 feet down, right where the placard said, Stairs, Basement Storage. I stood up, walked to the doorway, stopped. The glow was coming from above the basement door. There was a little indicator light mounted on the frame, the kind that tells you a room is live or occupied or whatever. It was red. Bright red. It hadn't been on before. I was sure of that. I'd walked past that door twice already tonight, and it was dark. I stood there watching it. The light didn't flicker, didn't dim, just stayed on, steady and red and wrong. I stared at that red light for probably 30 seconds before I remembered the pager number Judy had written on the back of the rules card. She'd said to call her if something went wrong, but she'd also mentioned the engineer, Braden something for equipment failures specifically. I figured a mysterious basement light counted as equipment. I walked back to the console and flipped the card over. The handwriting was different on the back, messier, like someone had added it later. Braden Nunez, engineer, Ext 41918, or pager 512. The pager number was written in blue pen, while everything else was black Sharpie. My phone still showed one flickering bar. I dialed the pager number, waited for the tone, punched in the studio line, and hung up. Then I sat there watching the automation countdown, 4 minutes until the next break, and tried not to look at the open doorway where that red glow was still visible down the hall. The studio phone rang maybe 2 minutes later. I grabbed it on the first ring. Hello? This is Braden. His voice was thick, groggy, definitely just woke him up. Who's paging from the station? Jeff Barry. I'm doing the overnight. Right, Judy mentioned. I heard rustling, maybe blankets. What's the problem? There's a red light on above the basement stairs, I said. It just turned on about 10 minutes ago, and before that I was hearing... I stopped. Saying it out loud made it sound ridiculous. There was something on Channel 6. A voice. Coming through the monitors even though the fader was down. Silence on the other end for long enough that I thought the call dropped. Braden? Yeah, I'm here. He cleared his throat. The light. Is it steady or blinking? Steady. Okay. That's the booth indicator. Means the ventilation system kicked on down there. I waited for him to explain why that mattered, but he didn't say anything else. Should I turn it off? I asked. No. His voice sharpened. Don't go down there. The basement has an old isolation booth from back when we did advertising sessions in-house. Soundproof box, about 6 by 8 feet. The vent system's on a timer, but it's been screwy for years. Sometimes it just turns on by itself. Okay, I said slowly. But what about the voice? On Channel 6? Another pause. Longer this time. What did it sound like? A guy singing. Old-timey stuff, I don't know. 40s or 50s, maybe. Clean voice, no reverb. Then he stopped singing and started asking if anyone could hear him. Braden didn't say anything. Then I heard my own voice. I continued. My hand was doing that shaking thing again, telling me to come downstairs. And when I called Judy, the same singer interrupted her voicemail. "Stop." Braden's voice went flat. "Did you respond to it?" Yeah, on talkback. I told him the line was live. Shit. I heard movement, footsteps. Okay, listen to me. That booth downstairs, there's a reason Judy put that rule on the card. Back in 1987, a singer named Timothy Ferguson rented studio time. Local guy trying to record a demo. He wanted that old-school isolated vocal sound, so he set up in the booth with a Neumann and a 2-track. I didn't say anything, just listened. He was down there alone, middle of the night just like you, and at some point he must have decided to clean the tape heads while he was recording because they found him with a bottle of head cleaner and a rag. Braden's voice stayed even, factual. The ventilation system was manual back then. You had to turn it on from outside the booth. He was inside with the door locked. Those booths lock from the inside so you can't be interrupted during a take, and the fumes built up. By the time someone found him Monday morning, he'd been dead for probably 2 days. My stomach did something unpleasant. They found claw marks on the inside of the door, Braden added. He couldn't get out. I looked at the console. Channel 6's meter sat at 0. So what does that have to do with... The reel was still running when they found him, Braden said. Recorded the whole thing. His last session, him asking if anyone was there, probably realizing something was wrong. Then silence, then scratching sounds. He paused. Judy locked the reel away years ago, but before that, it got transferred to the archive server. Sometimes old files get caught in loops, especially on the overnight automation. The system pulls from weird places when it's trying to fill dead air. But I heard it on Channel 6, I said. Not on air. And the fader was down. Channel 6 routes to Studio B, Braden interrupted. Which is what we call the basement booth now. If the vent system turned on, it might have activated the old talkback circuit. That whole setup is ancient. Hasn't been properly isolated. I wanted to believe him. It sounded technical enough to make sense. What about my voice? I asked. I heard myself. You've been awake how long? 24 hours? Braden's tone shifted, gentler. Your brain does weird things when you're tired. You hear patterns and static. You mishear your own thoughts. It happens to everyone on overnights. I guess. Look, he said. Whatever you're hearing, it's just an old transfer caught in a feedback loop. The system's trying to process corrupted audio and routing it to random channels. That's all. But here's what you need to do. Stop responding to it. Don't engage with anything on that channel. Don't answer if you hear your name. Just stay upstairs, keep the automation running, and finish your shift. I'll come in Monday and flush the archive cache. What if it happens again? Ignore it, Braden said firmly. The more you interact, the worse it gets. These old systems, they're half mechanical, half digital. They get confused, but they can't do anything if you don't feed them input. Got it? Yeah, got it. Good. Call me again if the transmitter goes down or the automation crashes completely. Otherwise, just ride it out. You'll be fine. He hung up before I could say anything else. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the rules card. Rule 1. Do not enter the basement level for any reason. Judy knew. That's why she put it first. I set the phone down and checked the automation countdown. 1 minute 20 seconds until the 2 a.m. break. After that, I had to fill out the transmitter log. Then just 3 more hours. I could do that. Stay at the console. Don't go near the basement. Ignore anything weird. The break triggered on time. Station ID, PSA for the food bank, underwriting spot for a South Lamar coffee shop. I walked down the hall to the transmitter log cabinet. keeping my eyes straight ahead and definitely not looking at the basement door with its steady red light. I unlocked the cabinet, filled in my readings: forward power 3000 watts, reflected power 16 watts, modulation 84%, locked it again, and walked back to the studio. My phone showed 2:08 a.m., 2 hours 52 minutes left. I pulled up Twitter on my phone but couldn't focus on anything. Just scrolled past words without reading them. Put it down. Watched the automation cue cycle through tracks. At 2:31 a.m., the stream dropped, not gradually, just cut out. The program meter on the console flatlined and the automation screen froze mid-waveform, cursor blinking in place. "Come on," I muttered, clicking the mouse. Nothing. I tried the keyboard. Still frozen. I reached for the phone to page Braden again, but then the screen refreshed on its own, the automation reloaded, and music came back through the monitors. Some indie folk track I didn't recognize. The stream counter showed we'd been off air for maybe 15 seconds. Long enough for listeners to notice, but not long enough to panic. I exhaled and sat back. That's when I heard it again. Not through the monitors this time, through the walls. The same voice, that clean tenor, but lower now, deeper, like someone had slowed down the tape. The words were stretched, distorted, but I could still make out the melody. Something old, something I'd heard before but couldn't name. I stood up and put my hand against the acoustic foam on the left wall. I could feel it. A vibration. Faint but steady, pulsing with the rhythm of the singing. The channel 6 meter didn't move. I yanked my hand back. The studio phone rang. I jumped hard enough that my knee hit the desk. The phone rang again, shrill and too loud. The little LCD screen on the handset showed caller ID, internal. I stared at it. Third ring. Don't answer. Braden said don't engage. Fourth ring. My hand picked up the receiver before my brain caught up. Hello? I can't breathe unless you play me. The voice was calm, matter of fact. Can you hear me? My throat closed up. Can you hear me? The voice repeated. Still calm, patient. I slammed the phone down so hard the whole console rattled. My hands were shaking bad now, both of them. The phone didn't ring again. I sat there breathing too fast, staring at the handset like it might do something else. Then my cell phone buzzed on the desk. One notification. Voicemail from Jeff Barry. My own name. My own number. I picked up the phone with fingers that didn't feel like mine anymore and stared at the screen. The voicemail icon sat there waiting. I didn't press it. I played the voicemail back. Didn't really want to, but I needed to know what I'd actually heard. Judy's greeting started normal. Professional. You've reached Judy Taylor at KUTX. I'm either on another call or away from my desk. Then it cut. What came next wasn't the singer asking if anyone could hear him. It was me. My voice. Singing. Not talking. Not the fake Jeff voice telling me to come downstairs. This was actual singing. A melody I didn't recognize. Words I'd never learned. The phrasing was mine, though. I could hear the way I breathe between lines. That little catch I get on sustained notes because I never learned proper diaphragm support. The verse went for maybe 8 bars. Something about a road and a river and waiting. Old-timey lyrics that sounded like they came from the same era as whatever the original singer had been doing. Then the singing stopped. Coughing started. Wet, rattling coughs that sounded like something was coming up. Not clearing your throat coughs, the kind that means something's wrong inside. They went on for maybe 5 seconds, getting worse, getting wetter, until there was this horrible inhale. Not a gasp. An inhale. Like trying to pull air through a straw coated in something thick. The voicemail cut off. I sat there holding the phone. My throat tightened. Just tightened up on its own, like my body was copying what I'd heard. I tried to swallow and it felt wrong, felt tight, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I coughed once, testing it, and the sound came out normal, but my brain immediately went to that wet rattle from the recording. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking again. Not a lot. Just enough that I had to flatten them on the desk. The automation was still running. Some indie folk track with banjo. The countdown showed 2 minutes until the next break. Everything in the studio looked exactly the same. Console faders, pyramid foam on the walls, crooked bumper sticker on the door. But my throat stayed tight. I tried swallowing again. Still felt wrong. I coughed again and it sounded fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building up in there. Something I'd need to cough out. I stood up. Walked to the break room, moving fast, not looking at the basement door with its red light still glowing steady. The break room was exactly like I remembered. Cheap table, plastic chairs, broken microwave with the handwritten note. I went to the sink and turned the tap. The water came out in a thin stream, slightly brown for the first second, then clear. I cupped my hands under it and drank. Cold. Tasted like metal and old pipes. I drank 3 handfuls, forcing it down, feeling it slide past that tightness in my throat. Didn't help. The tightness stayed. My body was convinced something was wrong, convinced I needed to cough, and the rational part of my brain that knew I was fine couldn't override it. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked back to the studio. Sat down. Watched the automation handle the break at 2:15, station ID, PSA for some literacy program, underwriting spot for a pizza place on East 6th. I filled out the log. My handwriting looked worse than before, shaky, uneven, letters cramped together. The tightness wouldn't leave. I kept swallowing, kept testing my throat, kept feeling that phantom wrongness that shouldn't be there. Braden's explanation was falling apart in my head. Old files caught in loops, corrupted audio. My brain doing weird things because I was tired. Sure. Except I'd just heard myself singing a song I'd never learned, and now my throat felt like it was closing up for no reason. I checked my phone. 2:23 a.m. 2 hours and 37 minutes left. I stared at the console. Channel 6's meter was flat, no movement. The fader was still all the way down where I'd left it. Everything looked normal, but rational explanations were slipping. That's the thing about working overnight in a building where someone died. You can tell yourself it's all explainable. Automation glitches, crossed lines, fatigue, and it works fine until your body starts reacting to things that shouldn't be happening. Then the explanation stopped sticking. I needed something that made sense. Anything. I looked at the rules card taped next to the center fader. 8 rules. Don't enter the basement. Don't adjust the limiter. Don't play unmarked reels. Don't leave during your shift. My eyes kept going back to Rule 1. Do not enter the basement level for any reason. Braden had said Studio B was down there. The old isolation booth. 6 by 8 feet, soundproof, where Timothy Ferguson locked himself in and died breathing head cleaner fumes while the reel kept recording. But there was another Studio B, wasn't there? Had to be. I stood up. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid. But I needed something concrete, something I could see and touch and confirm was just a room with equipment and walls. I walked down the hall, past the break room, past the server room with its steady hum, past the storage closet. There was a door I'd missed before. 20 feet past the studio, opposite side from the basement stairs. Beige door, no window, small placard that read, Studio B, Isolation. Not downstairs, right here on the main level. I stopped in front of it. The door was closed. The knob was brushed steel, standard commercial hardware. I reached for it, thinking maybe I could reboot something in there, get away from the main console for a minute, clear my head in a quieter space. The knob didn't turn. Locked. I tried again, putting more pressure on it. Definitely locked. But something looked wrong. I crouched down, eye level with the knob. There was metal dust on the floor. Fresh metal dust. Little silver-gray shavings scattered on the carpet right below the keyhole. Maybe a dozen tiny pieces catching the fluorescent light. I touched the knob again, looking close. The edge of the keyhole had fresh scratches. Thin lines in the steel, bright and unoxidized, like someone had been working on it recently. Filing it, maybe. Or drilling. I stood up. My throat was still tight. I looked down the hall toward the studio, then back at the door. On the wall next to the door frame, about shoulder height, there was a piece of paper taped up. Not just paper. A laminated card. Same size as the rules card in the studio. 5 by 7 inches white background. I stepped closer. It was another copy of the rules. Same 8 numbered lines in bold black text. But someone had marked it up. Rule 3. Do not play any unmarked reels or cassettes. Had a line drawn through it in blue pen. Not crossed out to delete it. Underlined. Emphasized. And in the margin next to it, in different handwriting than Judy's, someone had written, E. Row. Final. Below that, in the same blue pen, only way to stop it. I read it 3 times. E. Row. Not Timothy Ferguson. Braden had said Ferguson died in the booth in '87, but this card was talking about a reel. A final reel, marked with a different name. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the card. The flash reflected off the lamination, but the text was readable. My throat tightened again and I coughed. It came out dry, normal, but my body was still convinced something was wrong. I walked back to the studio. Sat down. The automation was playing something instrumental, piano and strings. The countdown showed 5 minutes until the next break. I stared at the console. Then I heard it, not on the monitors this time, through the studio door, coming from somewhere down the hall, singing. The same clean tenor voice, same 40s-era melody, but this time I could make out the words. Jeff, just my name, sung on pitch, held for 2 beats, then trailing off. I stood up so fast the chair rolled backward and hit the rack. Channel 6's meter wasn't moving. The sound was coming from the hallway. Jeff, I need you to hear me. Sung, not spoken. Every word on pitch, phrased like lyrics. I walked to the door and looked out. Empty hallway, fluorescent lights, beige walls. The red light above the basement stairs was still glowing. Jeff, please. It was coming from down the hall, past Studio B's door, toward the storage closet maybe. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't corrupted audio routing to random channels. This was something using my name. I went back to the console and sat down. My hands were shaking worse now. I put them on the desk and watched the automation count down. 4 minutes. The singing stopped. I waited. Nothing. 3 minutes. I opened my phone and almost called Judy again, then remembered what happened last time. Almost called Braden, then remembered him saying not to call unless the transmitter went down. 2 minutes. I couldn't stay in here for 2 more hours. Not with that voice using my name, not with my throat still tight and my hands shaking and rational explanations completely gone. I needed the real. E-row. Final. Only way to stop it. I stood up. The supply closet was past the break room on the right. I'd walked past it twice tonight. Cardboard boxes and XLR cables. That's what I'd seen through the half-open door. I walked fast, keeping my eyes forward, not looking at the basement stairs. The closet door was open maybe 6 inches. I pushed it wider. The light was off inside, but the hallway fluorescence gave me enough to see. Metal shelving unit on the left, stacked with boxes labeled PSAs 2019 and promo cuts. Cardboard box on the floor with cables, mop and bucket in the back corner, and on the right wall, hanging on a pegboard hook at eye level, a key ring. Not the key ring Judy gave me. That one was still in my pocket. 2 keys, door key, and transmitter log key. This key ring had 4 keys. I stepped into the closet and took it down. The keys were different sizes. One looked like another door key. One was small and brass, maybe for a filing cabinet. One was copper with a round head, similar to my transmitter key but slightly larger. The 4th was labeled. A strip of white tape wrapped around the key shaft with Archive written in black Sharpie. Judy's handwriting. I stood there holding the key ring, staring at the label. Someone had put this here. These were Judy's keys. Had to be. She was program director. She'd have access to everything. But they were hanging in the supply closet on a pegboard hook where anyone could find them. Where I could find them. I closed my fist around the keys. The metal was cold. My throat was still tight, and my hands were still shaking, and something down the hall had just sung my name 3 times. I walked back to the studio. The automation was handling the break. Station ID, weather sponsor, PSA. I sat down and set the key ring on the desk next to the phone. 4 keys. One labeled Archive. Only way to stop it. I stared at them. The break ended and music started again. Some Americana track with slide guitar. I kept staring at the keys. I closed my fist around the key ring. 4 keys, cold metal, Judy's handwriting on the Archive label. I wanted proof. That was the main thing. By morning, the day crew would show up, and I'd tell them what happened, and they'd look at me the way people look at you when you're clearly just tired and confused. Braden already sounded half convinced I was hearing things. I needed something concrete, a file name, a cable routing, something I could point to. But also, and I'm not going to pretend this wasn't part of it, the station kept pushing me toward the basement. The red light. The voice on Channel 6 coming from Studio B, which according to the door placard was down there. The card on the wall with the note about the reel. Even Judy leaving her keys on that pegboard hook where I'd find them felt deliberate. I stood up. The automation was running fine. 3 minutes until the next break. My phone showed 2:27 a.m. 2.5 hours left. I walked out into the hallway. The red light above the basement stairs was still on. Steady, bright, no flicker. I'd been avoiding looking at it directly for the past hour, but now I walked straight toward it. The door had a standard lever handle, no lock. The placard read, Stairs, Basement Storage, in the same beige plastic as Studio B's sign. I put my hand on the handle. Cold brushed steel. I pushed down and the door opened inward. Concrete steps going down. Maybe 12 or 15 of them, steep, with a metal railing bolted to the left wall. A pull-chain light at the top of the stairwell, already on, casting yellow light that didn't quite reach the bottom. The walls were painted cinder block, same industrial beige as the hallway but older, with water stains near the ceiling. I started down. The smell hit me around the 5th step. Sharp, chemical, almost sweet, like nail polish remover or the stuff you use to clean tape heads. Acetone, maybe. It burned the back of my throat a little and I had to breathe through my mouth. The basement was smaller than I expected. One long corridor, maybe 30 feet. Concrete floor, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, 2 doors on the right side, and 1 at the far end. Fluorescent lights in wire cages. The chemical smell was stronger down here, coming from somewhere ahead. The first door on the right was open. I glanced in. Storage, metal shelves with cardboard boxes labeled Tax Records 1999, 2003. And a stack of old turntables still in shipping foam. The second door was steel, windowless, a red indicator light mounted on the frame above it, glowing bright. That was the light I'd seen from upstairs. I stopped in front of it. No placard, no label. Just a lever handle with a card reader mounted next to it, the same type as the side entrance upstairs. The reader had a steady green light. I tried the handle. It opened. The room inside was maybe 10 by 12, concrete floor, cinder block walls, low ceiling with 2 fluorescent panels. Against the far wall stood the isolation booth. It looked exactly how Braden described it. 6 by 8 feet, maybe 7 feet tall. Walls made of layered plywood and soundproofing material, dark brown and slightly warped. A small window in the front, maybe 12 inches square, double-pane glass, grimy. The door was heavy wood with a handle on the outside, and I stepped closer to see a simple sliding bolt lock on the inside, the kind you'd use on a bathroom stall. Totally manual. I looked through the window. Inside, brown acoustic tile on all surfaces, stained and peeling in the corners. A microphone stand in the center, old chrome, adjusted to about chest height. No microphone on it. And on the back wall, behind where the stand was pointing, I saw the gouges. Deep scratches. Clusters of them. Scraped into the acoustic tile and the wood underneath, down to bare material. They were concentrated around shoulder and chest height, radiating out from 2 main points like someone had clawed at the wall with both hands. The mic stand was aimed right at them. I stood there staring through the grimy glass. My throat felt tight again. The booth door wasn't latched. I could see the gap, maybe half an inch between the door and the frame. Something was jammed in there. I leaned closer. Foam. Acoustic foam, the cheap pyramid kind, folded over and wedged into the gap like a doorstop. Dark gray compressed from the pressure. I reached for the door handle. I wasn't going to go in. I just wanted to see better, maybe open it a few inches. My eyes were watering from the chemical smell. I had to squint. I pulled the door toward me maybe 3 inches, and the smell got worse, made my sinuses burn. I backed up half a step to avoid breathing it too deep. The foam moved. Not from my pulling the door. From inside. It slid deeper into the gap, pushed from the interior side, and I heard a soft click as the bolt lock engaged. The door was shut, fully closed, locked from inside. I stepped back. The talkback speaker crackled. It was mounted on the wall next to the booth, a small metal grill maybe 4 inches across, the kind of intercom you'd use to communicate with someone recording inside. A red light on the speaker housing turned on. The singing came through. Clean tenor, controlled, confident. The same voice from Channel 6, but louder now, more present, singing a melody I didn't recognize with lyrics about a road and a river. I stared at the speaker. Not at the booth, at the speaker, because this wasn't something unreal or impossible. This was rooted audio, a talkback circuit. Braden said the vent system might have activated the old talkback, and here it was. An actual physical speaker connected to actual cables running through actual conduit along the basement ceiling. That snapped me into action. I turned and ran back into the corridor, looking up at the pipes and cable runs. The talkback had to route somewhere. Probably the rack room upstairs, or maybe a patch bay down here. But the cables had to be visible because this building was old enough that everything was surface mounted. I found the rack room at the end of the corridor. Another steel door, this one propped open with a brick. Inside, 2 equipment racks bolted to the wall, maybe 6 feet tall each, filled with old patch bays and distribution amps and stuff I half recognized from studio work. Cables everywhere. XLR, 1/4 inch, RCA, bundled with zip ties and running up into the ceiling. The singing was still coming from the booth room behind me, muffled through the walls. I traced the talkback cable. It wasn't hard to find. Someone had labeled it with yellow tape wrapped around the sheath every few feet, marked Booth TB in Sharpie. The cable ran from a panel on the left rack up through a conduit grommet into the ceiling space. I crouched down to look at the connections. The connectors looked shiny, new. The XLR plug going into the patch bay had clean metal contacts, no oxidation, and the strain relief boot wasn't yellowed or cracked like the other cables around it. Someone had replaced this recently, or re-terminated it. I grabbed the cable and yanked. The connector pulled free from the patch bay with a soft click. The singing stopped. Silence. I stood there holding the cable, breathing hard, my hands shaking worse than before. Relief lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then I heard it coming from upstairs. Not through the talkback speaker, through the ceiling, through the goddamn studio monitors. I ran for the stairs. By the time I got to the studio, the voice was on air. Not just in the monitors, actually broadcasting. The automation screen showed the current track playing, some indie folk song, but I could hear Timothy Ferguson's voice over it, sharp and present, singing the same melody from before. And underneath it, harmonizing, I heard myself, my voice, singing the same lyrics a third below the melody, matching his phrasing exactly, breathing where he breathed. I grabbed the headphones and cued the program output. Both voices were there, mixed together, going out over the air to every listener in Austin. The automation screen flickered. A new file appeared in the queue, jumping to the top of the playlist. The file name read E-Row, Final. The track started to load. Progress bar filling, 30%, 40. I clicked cancel. The button grayed out. A dialog box appeared, override active. Cancel command requires authorization from engineering panel. Below that, in smaller text, location, basement, rack room. B. The progress bar hit 60%. Braden showed up at 4:10. I was still at the top of the stairs when I heard the side entrance buzz and footsteps coming down the hallway. My first thought was relief. Someone else was here, someone who could fix whatever the hell was happening. Then I remembered I'd just locked the talkback cable in my fist and pulled the booth door shut on empty air. Braden came around the corner carrying a small canvas tool bag. He looked exactly like his voice sounded on the phone, calm, unhurried, maybe a little tired. Sandy blonde hair thinning at the temples. Work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He stopped when he saw me standing there with the basement door open behind me. "Jeff," he said, not a question. "Yeah." "Thought I told you to stay upstairs." I didn't say anything. My hand was cramping around the talkback cable, and I realized I was still holding it, the XLR connector dangling at my side like I'd ripped it out of the wall, which I had. Braden's eyes flicked to the cable, then back to my face. "You went down." The voice was coming from the basement. I followed it. He set the tool bag on the floor and rubbed his face with both hands. That's when I saw his fingers. The pads and edges were stained dark gray, almost black in the creases, and there were reddish marks on his knuckles that looked like chemical burns. The same smell I'd been breathing in the basement. Sharp, acetone. Something that stuck in your throat. "You've been down there already," I said. Braden dropped his hands. "I'm here to clear the loop and reset a breaker, that's it. Then you can finish your shift and go home. Your hands smell like the booth." He looked at me for a long second. Then he picked up the tool bag and walked past me toward the basement stairs. "Come on, I'll show you what needs fixing." I followed him down. Didn't really decide to. Just did. The chemical smell got worse with every step, and by the time we reached the bottom, my eyes were watering. Braden didn't react at all. He walked straight to the rack room at the end of the corridor, set his bag on the floor next to the equipment racks, and pulled a key ring from his pocket. It had maybe a dozen keys on it, all labeled with colored tape. He unlocked a panel I hadn't noticed before, a gray metal box mounted low on the wall near the floor, about the size of a breaker box. Inside were 3 toggle switches with labels in faded Sharpie. Vent fan, booth PWR, talkback AMP. All 3 were in the down position. Braden flipped the vent fan switch up. A motor kicked on somewhere behind the walls with a rattling hum that sounded like it hadn't been oiled in years. I waited for the chemical smell to start clearing. Instead, it got worse. A lot worse. The air coming out of the vents wasn't fresh. It was thick and sweet and burned the back of my throat so bad I had to cover my mouth with my sleeve. "That's backwards," I said. My voice came out muffled through the fabric. Braden watched the vent grate in the ceiling. Yeah. You said the system was broken. It is, I broke it. He said it like he was describing routine maintenance. Calm, matter of fact. Ventilation's supposed to pull air out of the booth and push fresh air in. I reversed the ducting about 6 years ago. Now it just recirculates fumes and pushes them into the room. I stepped back toward the doorway. My head was already starting to feel light and disconnected. The same floaty feeling you get from breathing in a Sharpie too long. Why the hell would you do that? Makes people dizzy. Easier to steer when they're not thinking straight. He looked at me. You went down there alone at 2 a.m. because you heard a voice. You think you would have done that sober? I thought about the tightness in my throat, the way my hands had been shaking, the fact that I'd walked down here even though every part of the rules card said not to. Timothy Ferguson, I said. Good bait. Clean voice, old-timey song, real sad story. People want to help. Braden crouched next to his tool bag and unzipped it. Inside, I saw cable strippers, electrical tape, a small digital recorder, and 3 unmarked SD cards in a plastic case. Or they get curious. Either way, they come downstairs, breathe the fumes for a few minutes, and by the time I suggest they step into the booth to check the mic setup, they're confused enough to do it. Then what? I lock the door, turn on the talkback, let them sing or talk or scream, doesn't matter. It all records. Then I layer it into the archive and it plays back the next time. He pulled out the digital recorder and turned it over in his hands, those stained fingers casual and steady. You heard yourself tonight, right? Singing something you didn't know. My throat closed up. I remembered the wet rattle, the coughing that sounded like drowning. That wasn't me. Not yet. Braden stood up. But it would have been. Another 20 minutes in the booth and I'd have enough for a clean loop. Your voice asking for help, calling your own name, begging someone to open the door. Then the next guy hears it and comes down, and I add his voice and it keeps building. I looked past him toward the booth room. The red light was still on above the door. How many people? You'd be number 8. He said it like he was proud. Ferguson was first, but he was an accident. I didn't plan that one. Just found him Monday morning and realized what I had. After that, I started testing it. Took a while to get the fume levels right. Too much, and they pass out before I can get them inside. Too little, and they fight. Judy knows. Judy suspects. That's why she wrote the rules. Thought she could keep people alive with a laminated card and some scary warnings. He shook his head. Didn't work. You still came down. He was right. I'd read the rules. I'd heard Braden on the phone telling me not to engage, not to go downstairs, just finish the shift. And I'd come down anyway because I wanted proof, or because I was tired, or because some part of me needed to see what was making the sound. Braden took a step toward me, not fast, just closing the distance. I'm going to need you to go stand by the booth door, he said. I didn't move. Jeff, don't make this harder. You're going to lock me in. Yeah, and record me. That's the idea. My hand was still cramping around the talkback cable. I looked down at it. Black rubber jacket, XLR connector, strain relief boot still intact. Then I looked at the panel on the wall with the 3 switches. Vent fan was up. Booth PWR and talkback amp were still down. You replaced this cable, I said. Braden stopped. What? The talkback cable, upstairs in the rack. It's new. You re-terminated it recently. I held up the connector. All the other cables in that room are 20 years old, but this one's shiny. No oxidation. Clean contacts. He stared at me. You've been maintaining it, keeping it ready. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. This whole thing only works if the booth can talk to the studio. If I can hear Ferguson's voice. If the next guy can hear mine. You need the talkback circuit. Doesn't matter now, I've got a spare. But you didn't want to use the spare. You wanted the original cable because it's already routed, already patched, already part of the system. Replacing it means tearing into walls and risking someone noticing. I was talking faster now, brain catching up. That's why you came tonight. I pulled the cable and killed the loop, and you need to fix it before morning shift. Braden's expression didn't change, but his shoulders shifted. Small adjustment, weight going forward. Booth door, now. He moved. I didn't think, just reacted. I grabbed the foam wedge that had fallen on the floor outside the booth room and threw it at Braden's feet. He stepped on it wrong. Heel came down on the compressed edge, and his ankle rolled. Not much, just enough. I shoved him. He stumbled backward into the booth room doorway and caught himself on the frame, then came at me fast, got his hands on my shoulders and pushed me toward the booth. I twisted sideways and slammed my elbow into the booth door. It flew open. I'd left it unlatched when I pulled it shut earlier, and Braden's momentum carried him forward. His forearm hit the door frame, and I grabbed the door with both hands and swung it hard. The edge caught his forearm. He yelled and tried to pull back, but I slammed it again and again. His fingers opened and the keyring fell, hit the concrete floor with a metal clatter. I kicked it behind me and shoved the door one more time. Braden pulled his arm free, and I threw my whole weight against the door. It shut with a heavy thunk. I heard the bolt slide from inside, his side, and then nothing. He'd locked himself in. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the door. Through the small window I could see movement. Braden's face appeared, pale and furious, mouth moving, but I couldn't hear anything. Soundproof booth. That's what it was designed for. Then he started coughing. The fumes. The vent fan was still running, still pushing contaminated air into the room, and the booth was sealed. I watched him double over, one hand on the mic stand for balance. His shoulders heaved. I picked up his keyring from the floor and ran back to the rack room. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the right key into the panel lock. I found the vent fan switch and flipped it down. The rattling motor stopped. Then I hit talkback amp, down, killing power to the speaker circuit. Last was booth PWR. I hesitated for half a second, then switched it down too. The red light above the booth door went dark. I looked up at the equipment racks. 2 6-foot racks bolted to the wall, packed with gear, cables everywhere. I found the main power strip for the reel deck stack, old Tascam units with the reels still slowly turning, and yanked the plug straight out of the wall. The reels stopped. The loop died. Silence. I ran for the stairs. Hit them fast, took them 2 at a time, shoved through the door at the top. The hallway fluorescents were too bright after the basement, and I had to squint. I found the fire alarm pull station next to the break room, red handle behind a plastic cover, and smashed the cover open with my palm. The handle came down smooth, and the alarm started screaming, high and piercing and loud enough to hurt. I kept moving. Down the hall to the lobby. My phone was still in the studio, but there was a desk phone on the reception counter, old Cisco unit with a blinking red light. I grabbed the handset and punched 911. It rang twice. 911, what's your emergency? Chemical leak at KUTX radio station on South Congress. There's a man trapped in a booth in the basement. He's breathing solvent fumes. You need to get here now. Sir, what's the address? I gave it. My voice sounded weird and flat under the alarm. Is the man conscious? I don't know. He was coughing when I left him. Are you in danger? No. He's locked in, but the fumes. He needs help. Units are on the way. Can you stay on the line? Yeah. I stayed on the line. Stood there in the lobby with the alarm screaming and the phone pressed to my ear while the dispatcher asked me questions I barely heard. How long had he been in the booth? What kind of chemicals? Was anyone else in the building? I answered what I could. The first responders showed up 6 minutes later. I heard the sirens before I saw the lights. Then strobes filled the lobby windows, red and white, flashing across the walls. I hung up the phone and went to unlock the front door. A woman in full turnout gear came through first, helmet on, face shield down. She had captain markings on her shoulders. You called it in? Her voice was loud and direct. Yeah, he's in the basement. Isolation booth at the end of the hall, locked from the inside. Chemicals. Solvent. Acetone, maybe, or head cleaner. The ventilation system was pushing it into the booth. She turned and shouted something to her crew. 3 more firefighters came through the door carrying equipment. She pointed 2 of them toward the basement stairs and told me to wait outside. I didn't argue, just walked out into the parking lot and sat down on the curb. The air was cool and clean, and I breathed it in deep, trying to get the chemical smell out of my nose. It didn't work. I could still taste it. 2 police units pulled up while I was sitting there. One of them, a guy in his 30s, short black hair, APD uniform, came over and asked my name. I told him. He wrote it down in a small notebook. You work here? Overnight board operator. First week. You pulled the alarm? Yeah. Tell me what happened. So I did. Started with the voice on channel 6 and worked forward. The basement, the booth, the scratches on the wall. Braden showing up and admitting he'd been locking people inside to record them. The officer's expression didn't change, but he wrote faster. A woman in a blazer joined us halfway through. Detective, based on the ID badge clipped to her belt. Carmen Torres. Dark hair and a low ponytail, sharp eyes. She let me finish, then asked, "Where's the evidence?" Basement rack room. He had SD cards in his tool bag. And the reels. They're still in the rack. Plus the booth. There's scratches on the inside walls. She nodded and walked toward the building. The officer, Walter Nichols, he'd told me, stayed with me and asked more questions. How long had Braden been in the booth? Had I seen him ingest anything? Was the door secure? I didn't know most of the answers. The fire captain came out about 10 minutes later. Marjorie Howell. She pulled off her helmet and her face was flushed and sweaty. "We got him out," she said. Unconscious but breathing. Medics are with him now. I nodded, didn't know what else to do. "You did the right thing calling it in. Is he gonna make it?" "Don't know yet. Depends how long he was breathing it." She looked back at the building. "That booth's a death trap. Needs to be condemned." Walter went inside with her. I stayed on the curb. An ambulance left about 5 minutes later, lights on but no siren. I watched it turn onto South Congress and disappear. Carmen Torres came back out carrying 2 evidence bags. One had SD cards. The other had what looked like a printed list and some kind of notebook. She stopped next to me. "We found labeled cards," she said. Multiple marked final, plus a list of overnight employees with notes about who responded to what. He was keeping records. "Yeah." She tilted her head. "Your name's on there. Says you answered the talkback." I did, before I knew what it was. "Lucky you figured it out." I didn't feel lucky. She went to bag everything in her vehicle. Walter came back and told me I'd need to come down to the station later to give a formal statement. I said okay. He gave me a card with a case number and told me not to leave town. I wasn't planning on it. Judy showed up at sunrise. I was still sitting on the curb when her car pulled into the lot. She got out fast, saw the fire trucks and police units, saw me, walked straight over. "Jeff." "Hey." She looked at the building, then back at me. "What happened?" "Braden." I couldn't say more than that. My throat was too tight. Judy sat down next to me on the curb. Didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there while the sky went from black to dark blue to pale gray. "I suspected him for years," she finally said. "Wrote the rules. Thought if I made them scared enough, they'd stay alive. Didn't work. No. You could have told me." "And said what?" "The engineer might try to lock you in a booth and record you dying. You wouldn't have taken the job." She rubbed her face. "I relied on fear. Figured fear was safer than truth." "How many people did he get?" "Before you?" "7 that I know of. Maybe more." Her voice was flat. "They all quit after one shift. Wouldn't say why. I thought they were just spooked by the building. You didn't check the booth? I checked the recordings, pulled anything marked final from the archive, locked the original Ferguson reel in my office. I thought that was enough. She looked at me. I didn't know he was making new ones. I thought about my own voice singing, the coughing, the wet rattle. He recorded me, I said. I know. Is it still in the system? Torres took the SD cards. She'll delete them after the case. Judy stood up and brushed off her slacks. Station's shutting down for a week, maybe more. Hazmat needs to clear the basement, and we're pulling the booth out completely. Good. You don't have to come back. I looked up at her. What? After this. You don't have to finish the job. I'll pay you for the full week regardless. What about Braden? He woke up in the ambulance. They're holding him at the hospital until he's stable, then he's going into custody. She handed me a business card. Her card. Same number that was on the rules sheet. Torres has enough evidence. The cards, the list, the booth itself. You'll need to testify eventually, but that's months away. I took the card, didn't look at it. Judy started to leave, then stopped. The rules weren't enough. I'm sorry. She walked back to her car and drove away. The hazmat contractor showed up around 8. Dorothy Gutierrez. She wore full coveralls and a respirator and wouldn't let anyone back in the building until she'd tested the air quality. Took her 3 hours. When she finally came out, she told the fire captain the basement needed professional remediation and the booth had to be removed by a licensed crew. The construction foreman arrived the next day. Grayson Martin. Broad guy, hard hat, high visibility vest. He took one look at the booth and said it was a hazard and needed to go. They pulled it out in sections over 2 days, walls first, then the frame, then the floor panels. I wasn't there for most of it. Judy called and told me to stay home until the all clear. KUTX came back on air the following Monday. I didn't listen. The coughing started 3 days after the incident. Just a tickle at first, then a tightness, then a wet rattle that sounded exactly like the recording. My doctor said it was anxiety, psychosomatic, gave me an inhaler and told me to rest. It didn't help. I kept hearing my own voice singing words I didn't know, kept feeling my throat close up, kept waking up at 2 in the morning convinced I was locked in a small room with no air. I went back to work 2 weeks later. Judy had moved me to afternoon drive, 4 to 8 p.m., full daylight. The studio was the same, but they'd sealed the basement door with a steel plate and padlock. Channel 6 was dark. The rules card was gone. I kept the job for 6 weeks, long enough to catch up on rent and pay off my landlord, long enough to prove to myself I could finish something. Then I put in notice and Judy didn't argue. My last shift was a Wednesday in late October. I filled out the log, cued the evening block, and walked out at 8 p.m. while the sun was still visible on the horizon. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Just left the badge on the desk and drove home. I never worked overnight again.